Hello, 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 ladies. Good evening, all of you beautiful ladies who are joining me tonight for night 2 of Reset the Airwaves. And this is our evening fireside chat. So, we are going to extend our topic that we began this morning talking about going from fear based to faith led. And we had an amazing guest this morning with Dr. Flanders. So, if you all have not had the opportunity to watch the video, make sure you check out the video here on my channel, and you guys can watch the replay of our conversation, and which is really going to start as a foundation for what we're going to talk about tonight. So please go back and watch it. It was amazing. So just to get into it tonight, if you are just joining us for Reset the Airwaves, you're like, what is this about? It is a 5-day series that I'm doing. It's an interview series with purpose-led women who are living a life of purpose, who are striving to do things in alignment with their soul, and just also about them talking about their journey of how they got there. And so I wanted to do this series because we are in July. And I know that that is a time of year when everybody's looking back on the goals that they set in January. And you're like, I am way off where I said I wanted to be right now. Or maybe you're even very close, you're very on point with what you set out to do this year, and you hit a rut. And so you're just looking for an opportunity to reset. And so this is what this series is all about, just about providing moments of a sacred space where you can just come and be your whole self. You can really examine where you are right now and really reset and move forward so that the rest of the year is really in alignment with your purpose and the woman that you are becoming professionally and personally. So, who am I? I am Tynisha Wooley. I am a higher educational professional, but higher education, I say that wrong every time, higher education professional by day, and a soul and leadership transformation coach by divine assignment. And I say that by divine assignment because I really felt like I've been in training for this calling and for being able to empower women in this way all of my life. And so I desire to help professional women who find themselves at all levels of the spectrum of leadership. So whether that's emerging, whether that's entry level, whether that's elevating to the next level in your career, I want to be your support system and just to partner with you in where God is leading you and taking you. So that's a little bit about who I am and why we're doing this series, because I want us to all walk in soul alignment and purpose together. Now, the topic today is the art of unlearning fear-based living. And so I have to be very transparent with you ladies right from the start and just let you know that I myself, for most of my life, have had a very intimate relationship with fear. Not by choice all the time, but because I have let fear lead in the driver's space of my life. And we'll talk about how to unpack that tonight. But my biggest fear is the fear of visibility. And this has really been a struggle for me and really pushing forward and walking in my purpose and stepping out on faith and doing all the things fully that God has called me to do. And really, just plainly speaking, really being obedient to what God says that I should be doing, because have this huge fear of visibility. So part of this moment of Reset the Airways is me actively trying to conquer that fear, actively providing a space for other women leaders to amplify their voice, but as well for me to share my voice and what God has placed in my heart. So I want you guys to know that as we are talking about this episode of fear, I am right here with you. It's something that I am actively working on. It's the thorn in my side right now. And I just believe that God gives us the grace to be able to conquer it and to walk through every moment step by step. So as you guys are watching these videos, as you guys are subscribing and liking these videos, I truly appreciate you. And I just want you to know that every time you do that, that encourages my spirit. Every day I think twice about like, okay, am I going to go live? But I know that this purpose is bigger than me. And so despite the nerves, the jittery hands, and all the anxiety that comes with being visible and showing up in this way, I am committed to it. I'm committed to what God has called me to do, and I just thank you guys for being along this journey with me. And so just pray for me, that I will continue to just have the courage just to step out in faith. So I just wanted to be transparent with you guys so you guys know that the subject of fear is something that I am very, very intimate with. And I actively every day seek to take the steps to understand why, to figure out and dismantle why these beliefs that I have held such a stronghold in my life. And so that is the birth of this fireside chat tonight and what we're going to dig into. Because one thing that I've learned with my own relationship with fear, and then walking with women throughout their seasons of transition and reinvention and sometimes resistance, right, is that fear is not just an emotion, it's its whole entire system. And so we're going to talk about how we recognize that system tonight, how we recognize the patterns, and how fear can actually become a silent rhythm that runs with us and that can ruin our life because we are being held hostage to it. So unless we learn to reset that fear and move through our emotions and our actions, fear will rob us of the life that God has called us to. And so I don't want that to happen any longer, anymore, with myself or the women that God has connected me to. So tonight, we're going to go there with fear, and we're going to talk about how do we unlearn fear-based living. And I'm going to talk to you all and teach you a model that I personally walk through myself every time I feel that fear is trying to take the wheel. And that habit is the head, heart, or that model is the head, heart, habit model. Okay. So let's jump right in, and let's just start by exposing fear and its playbook and how it operates. As I mentioned earlier, fear is a system, and it gets into our minds, our thoughts, our beliefs. And then once it gets into our minds, it works to transform our emotions and how we feel, and the emotions that we assign to different situations. And then once it overtakes our emotions, those emotions begin to speak loud, and it actually becomes our behavior. And so I want to start out with just kind of a simple example of what it means for fear to start as a whisper in our heads, right? So some of y'all might be able to relate to this, but I am scared of dogs, or so I thought, right? So ever since I was a kid, I can just remember this idea of I'm scared of dogs. I mean, several members of my family don't like dogs, they're afraid of dogs. And so, that was just kind of the atmosphere, or the belief about dogs in our family. And so I just remember growing up with this idea, like, I'm scared of dogs. And I probably did not actually see a physical dog until I was probably like 5 or 6 years old, right? And so every time I would see a dog, like, I would have this fear, my heart would start palpitating. And every time the dog barked, I would leap and try to run the other way. And like, I just had this fear, I'm scared of dogs. And so it wasn't until I grew up, and started having friends that had dogs. And so, they were kind of a natural part of me hanging out with them at their houses, that I began to get a little more familiar with having dogs around, and then also start questioning, like, am I really afraid of dogs? Like, I've never had a dog try to bite me. I've never had a dog chase me. I've never had one respond to me really aggressive. So, like, where did this fear come from of me being scared of dogs? So, I'm at the point now where, I like little cute dogs, certain breeds of dogs. I still don't fool with the big ones, but this is just an example of how fear can whisper to us, how it can come from our loved ones, from the environments we're in. And if we're not careful, it can begin to take root. So fear starts in our logic mind, right? Our mental map. So that is where our thoughts are. That's where conditioning happens. That's where memories of our upbringing. That's where it's stored, all in our mental map. And so my example was dogs. And comment if you also had that same fear, or if you can relate to that comment, so I don't feel alone. But for more of a little bit deeper example outside of that, of how fear can whisper in your ear and get into your head. Maybe your example wasn't dogs, but maybe it was that you were made fun of when you were younger for having, a little extra love weight, is what I'll call it. And those whispers of the people who bullied you may have caused you to think, how can I get these people to like me and to back off? And so that eventually led to becoming the friend that you can always count on, the friend who will never tell you no. And so now that fear of not being accepted by those people who made fun of you has led to a life of people pleasing. Or maybe the fear that was whispered to you was from your family, and they whispered to you that you're the smart one. You're our little nerd in the family. You're going to go far. You're going to make this family proud. All of those things, which are great in itself. But now, as you've gone older and you're stepping into leadership positions, or just wanting to be more involved in your community or even in your relationships, you now have a fear that is rooted in performance, because you don't want to let other people down. And so instead of actively following your purpose, you're pursuing what will give you that validation from others. And we, as high achieving women who are leaders, are very, very crafty about dressing up fear sometimes. We often call it wisdom, or we call it caution. But I want to challenge you tonight to think about those whispers that you've held on to since you were a child, those whispers that may have been placed upon you by other people, by your atmosphere, by the environment that you've been in. That maybe those are not whispers, but they're actual mental agreements that you've made with yourself along your journey to protect yourself from being exposed, from being rejected, and from being disappointed again. In neuroscience, we call it cognitive imprinting, right? How those things are imprinted on our brain and become a part of how we think. But spiritually, I call it a soul vow. It's a promise that you have made to yourself because you don't want to be in a position where you feel like that again. You're trying to protect yourself. And you said, never again will I be in a position where I feel that uncomfortable. Well, I feel like my power is gone. And so you made a soul vow. But here's the truth. You cannot cast out what you're still calling wisdom. And you cannot unlearn what you have not named. So tonight we are actually going to put a name on the agreement or the fear that has been whispering from you from a little girl. I want you to think about, what have you mentally agreed to what have you mentally agreed to that feel? Hold on. Sorry. What have you mentally agreed to that no longer feels aligned to you or is a part of your assignment? I want you to sit with that question. What have you mentally agreed to that is no longer aligned to where you're going or your assignment? And this is the first part of our model. This is the head part. We're dealing with our thoughts, how we're thinking, and where that came from. And I want to show you guys what that looks like. This is the entire model. So we just talked about head and how those thoughts can come to us either consciously or unconsciously. So now I want to talk about heart. Once fear enters the head, it seeps into then our emotional system, which is our heart. And then the fear goes from a thought to, oh, maybe I am not good enough, to actually a feeling, which is, I feel unworthy. And there's a different kind of weight that comes with the feeling of feeling unworthy. So let me be clear that in our hearts, we have to sit with our hearts and we have to honor those feelings and also know that our heart is the container for both our trauma and our truth. So we want to acknowledge our emotions. We want to name them. We want to understand what exactly we're feeling on a deeper level. We want to be able to express. We want to be able to be vulnerable. We want to be able to know exactly what we need to give God so that He can reframe it and reshape it for us. Because our emotions do not lie. They tell us often where we are before sometimes our head can give words to it. And before we can even share it with someone else, our emotions will speak for us. How many of y'all are the type of woman where you don't have to say anything? It's written all over your face and people know exactly how you're feeling, right? Our emotions don't lie, but they don't tell the whole truth either. So that's why we have to sit and examine our hearts, because fear in our heart might sound like this. And fear is not the voice of truth. So the voice of fear might sound like, what if I'm too broken to lead? When the voice of truth comes from what God tells us in the Bible and who we are, the voice of truth says, you are fearfully and wonderfully made. The voice of fear says, what if I get this wrong again? The voice of truth says, my grace is sufficient. The voice of fear says, what if they leave? The voice of truth says, I will never leave and forsake you. So when we're talking about our heart, we have to distinguish which voice is leading us. Because if we lean into the voice of fear and how that feeling makes us react, then we'll live our lives from a place that is not what God intended. Dr. Anita Phillips, who is one of my favorite authors, and she's just amazing. So if you guys don't know who she is, make sure you look her up. Dr. Anita Phillips, and she has a new book called The Garden Within. And she teaches that the heart is neurological. It has its own memory, its own rhythm, and its own intelligence. So what is stored in our hearts will show up in our relationships. It'll show up in the way that you lead. It will show up in how you are present and present yourself and how you present your sense of worth. We all know the familiar scripture that says, guard your heart, from it flows the issues of life. So from it can flow the trauma that we've experienced, or from it can flow the healing that we've surrendered to. So the question is, what is flowing out of your heart? Because when our heart holds fear, it creates habits of self-preservation, not habits of purpose. So, examining our hearts. So, the next or the last section of this model that we're going to talk about is habits. And this is really the lifestyle level of this habit. So, we're going to talk about what begins as a belief in our head. And then, so we talked about, the beliefs that begin in our head and the thoughts that we think. And then that goes down to our hearts and it gets rooted. And then it impacts our behaviors and the things that we do without even thinking about it. And this is really where we see that fear begins to be routine. This is where we begin to see that we procrastinate on projects, that we overfunction on our job. So on a professional level, we're doing all the things, we're having really great outcomes. But on a personal level, we're under nurturing our dreams. This is where, as a routine, we avoid hard conversations. And we become so good at justifying why we're avoiding those hard conversations. If that's you, just go ahead and put your hands up in the comment, because I also too have been there. Having hard conversations means that we have to address many of our own fears and shortcomings, but as well, how do we deliver that conversation with love so that the other person can actually hear our hearts and not become offended? Routine also may look like staying invisible when God has called you to lead. And as I talked about earlier, that's really a space that is tender for me. Is staying in the shadows when I know that it doesn't service the purpose that God has called me to. So where have you been staying invisible in your life and not moving into the spaces, to the promotions, to the relationships, networking that God has placed in front of you? What opportunities have you shut down because fear has been the driving force in your life? And when we get to this point of fear being routine, it just becomes a part of who we are, what we do. We don't even notice it anymore. When we start normalizing these habits in our lives and letting fear lead our behavior, fear is not just then a bad habit. It's now becoming a way that we are protecting ourselves. We're protecting ourselves from growing. We're protecting ourselves from taking action that we need to take. These habits become fear in action, and then they're dressed up as survival. So how do we end up going throughout our day on the outside, seeming like we're making all of these accomplishments? We're closing deals. We're finishing the projects, meeting all the milestones. We're involved in the community. We're president of this, president of that. but still feel unfulfilled. And when we get into this place where we allow fear to be a protective strategy against our growth, this habit layer becomes more than just something we do. It becomes our own personal sense of armor. It becomes how we operate, our go-to defense. And here's the truth about having a personal layer of armor that is built on fear instead of truth. That armor can protect your pain, but it also can block your purpose. So if fear is living in your habits, it is time to reset, my sister friend. You don't need more willpower. It's time that we have a soul alignment. So I want to leave you all with this in a mini devotional moment. Is that God is not waiting for each of us to be fearless. He's just waiting on us to trust him more than the fear. He's waiting on us to put feet to our faith. We say that God has got us, but do we live that way? Scripture says you will never feel afraid. Scripture does not say that you will never feel afraid, but it does say, fear not, I am with you. And that's not denial. That is guaranteed divine partnership with God. So tonight I ask you, what beliefs need to be broken? What vows need to be healed? And what patterns need to be reset? Because this is your moment. If you are here on Reset the Airwaves, it is not by accident. You are here because God led you here for this moment. There is something in your soul that is stirring, that is saying, I need something to be different. I know that there's something more, and I need a reset. It's time to unlearn fear. It's time to unbind your patterns. And it is time to become the version of you that fear was hoping would never rise. Because when you rise to your purpose, you are unstoppable. There are so many people who are waiting on you to rise. There are so many people who need your encouraging word, who need your invention, who need your product, who need your presentation, who need your skill set. There are literally hundreds of thousands of people who are waiting for you to step into the place that God has called you to and to rise. So this is a fireside chat. And you guys who are rocking with me for a while know that I always give some reflection prompts. I love to journal. And so journaling is just a great way to be able to release everything that we've got going on in our heads. I mean, there's so much going on in our heads and in our hearts. And so we really do need a place just to be able to put it all down. So I'm always giving some reflection questions. So your soul check-in for tonight are these 3 questions. And it's going to address your head, your heart, and your habits. So, number 1, what fear-based thought have I normalized in my mind? What fear-based thought have I normalized in my mind? Question number 2, what emotion is sitting in my heart that still feels too big to confront? That's very juicy. Let me read it again. What emotion is sitting in my heart that still feels too big to confront? And question number 3, what habits are really fear in disguise? What habits are really fear in disguise? So I want y'all to take some time to write down those questions in your journal. get in a safe space, set a timer, give yourself time to really think about these questions. And you may have to sit down and do it more than once. It may not come to you just in one sitting. This is the opportunity for you just to sit with God, make yourself a priority, and reflect on where you are and what specific areas you need to reset. So I want you to write them down, and then I want you to bring them in prayer. Again, this is a divine partnership. You do not have to do this journey alone. God is waiting for you to come to him, to pour out, so that he can pour into you. So allow him to have that space in your life. And then once you do that, I want you to just determine one little step that you can take in faith that will help you overcome the fears that you have identified. Just one little step. I know all of us high achieving women, we want to go straight for the big thing, right? Which often leads to being overwhelmed. So just one step. And then once you conquer that, take another step and then another one. And that is how we're going to sustain conquering fear. Okay. So that is the end of our fireside chat tonight, talking about how to unlearn fear-based living. So I hope that you all were able to get some good nuggets from this fireside chat. And if you want to go deeper into how to unlearn fear, how to conquer it with courage and with faith, as you guys know, and I said at the top of this is something that I know intimately is the subject of fear. And so I have created a mini 21-day course on fear. The course will walk you through where fear hides, how we wear it, the different masks in the forms of either people-pleasing, perfectionism, comparison, delay, and then how do we dismantle it by really honing in on the voice of truth. So if you are interested in diving deeper into fear and how to conquer it, I want you to drop a hello faith, goodbye fear in the comments, and I will reach out to you and send you the link directly. Because it is time that we stop managing fear as a normal part of our lives and master it. And so I would love to help walk with you in that journey. So this is day 2. Tomorrow, day 3, we're continuing the journey on the reset. And we are going to talk about healing in motion. So how do you learn to utilize the power of trusting yourself again, trusting others, and most of all, trusting God's pace for your healing in your journey of reset and getting back to the woman that you are becoming and walking fully in your purpose? So you do not want to miss tomorrow's episode at 10 a.m. We're going to be joined by a psychotherapist who is going to help us break it all down. So it's going to be another good one. So make sure you are in the virtual room tomorrow at 10 a.m. And in order to get the link and to get a free whole woman reflection guide, which will again help you go a little bit deeper into journaling with some thought-provoking questions, please sign up here so that you can get those direct links and the guide. So until next time, ladies, which is tomorrow morning for the Reset the Airwaves interview, and then tomorrow night for the fireside chat, I just want you to know that fear may have been a chapter, but it is not the end of your story. This is an opportunity to reset your mind, reclaim your faith, and rewire the narrative, because ultimately you are made to rise. See you all next time.